call this meeting to order. This is the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for November 16th, 2020. Thank you for joining us. We have on our study session tonight one item, vaping and tobacco ordinance update. But as we do regularly, I would like to start our meeting with any citizen's right to speak on that agenda item. If you would like to speak, this is your opportunity to do so, and we will be using the raise your hand in the Zoom function, which is located in the center of your screen at the bottom. Click that to see participants and click on the participant icon, and you will see the raise your hand function. If you would like to speak, please raise your hand and we will bring you into the meeting. And after we finish the Zoom participants, we will invite you into the meeting on the telephone. So Ms. Scheck, is there anyone with their hands raised in the Zoom format that would like to speak tonight?
Yes, Mayor, we have Lori Odom.
All right, Ms. Odoms, if you would like to please join us, unmute yourself. If you would give us your first name and your last name and your address, then you will have an opportunity to speak, and we limit comments to 3 minutes. So please continue.
I'm Lori Odom, 11490 West 38th Avenue, Wheat Ridge. And I would like to speak on this item if it is appropriate for me to start now. Is that all right?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Mayor Starker and City Council members, I'm a Wheat Ridge resident for over 44 years, a retired pediatrician, co-chair of the Tobacco-Free Jeffco Alliance, and chair of Health, Wellness, and Safety for Jeffco PTA. Thank you very much for this opportunity to revisit an ordinance establishing tobacco retail licensing in Wheat Ridge and increasing the age of tobacco sales to 21. The 2019 Healthy Kids Colorado survey data show that more than 1 in 4 youth under 19 years of age in Jefferson County are currently vaping, and more than 3 in 4 saw ads for vape products in the prior 30 days. Several studies show that youth who use e-cigarettes are more likely to become lifelong smokers, with a recent study reporting that even adolescents who had no previous intention of smoking were 4 times more likely to begin using conventional cigarettes after vaping. And cigarette smoking remains the leading cause of preventable death in the United States. Nearly 95% of adult smokers started smoking before age 21. It's known that brain development continues until at least age 25, and that the developing brain is particularly vulnerable to the detrimental effects of psychoactive drugs. In addition to the significantly increased risk of addiction, adolescent use of nicotine can lead to problems with attention, learning, and memory, and these can become long-term or even permanent, as well as an increased risk of addiction to other psychoactive substances. A 2019 study found that teens and young adults with a history of regular nicotine e-cigarette use were 3.5 times more likely to start using marijuana than their peers who never vaped. Studies also show that nicotine, toxins, carcinogens, and other components of e-cigarette aerosol can cause irreversible lung damage. Of very great concern is recent data showing that smoking or vaping leads to an increased risk of severe illness with COVID-19. Research also shows that more tobacco retailers exist in areas with larger Black, Hispanic, and low-income residents, and more stores sell tobacco products to underage customers in these locations. In addition to the Juul, an extremely popular and discreet vaping device that I know you're familiar with, there's now an array of similar disposable devices flooding the market, such as the Puff Bar, that also come in a variety of flavors that are very appealing to youth. Again, thank you for your consideration of this ordinance that's so important for the youth of our thriving community, as well as consequential for equity and social justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Odoms. We appreciate you joining us tonight. Ms. Scheck, do we have additional speakers in Citizens' Right to Speak?
I don't see anyone with their hand up. Mayor.
Okay, if you were on the Zoom format and would like to speak under citizens' right to speak, you may raise your hand in the Zoom format, or if you're on the telephone, speak up now and we'll make arrangements to bring you into the meeting. If you're on the Zoom format, at the bottom of the screen is the participant button. If you'll click on that, the next screen will have a wording on the right-hand side, lower right, to raise your hand. If you want to speak, please use the raise your hand function, and we will bring you into the meeting. Do we have anyone who's raised their hand?
No, Mayor.
Okay, anyone, we'll do one more call to speak, citizens' right to speak. Now is the time to do it. And we don't see anyone, so we will close our citizens' right to speak and go to our staff report on this. Mr. Goff, Ms. Schilling is on the memorandum, but I will go to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, Mary Ann Schilling is here this evening to present this. But just briefly, this topic has been on City Council's agenda for quite some time. If you remember, we brought this forward, and we decided at that time, about a year or so ago, to wait to see what the state of Colorado was going to do with the legislation, and they did eventually pass a bill in the 2020 session. But then COVID hit, and we also decided to put this on hold for a bit also, so that because the passage of this ordinance would have some impact on our businesses, so we didn't want to overwhelm our businesses during this pandemic. But we thought it was time to bring this forward to give you an update on the state bill and get some direction if council wants to move forward now or wait to a later date. So I will turn it over to Mary Ann, and she will introduce our guest and give you a summary of where we're at today.
Thank you. So good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Mary Ann Schilling, Assistant to the City Manager. I'm here tonight with Ellen Stern, Tobacco Policy and Strategic Initiatives Team Lead for Jefferson County Public Health. We are here tonight to discuss a proposed youth vaping and tobacco ordinance. We have Division Chief Jim Lawrence and City Attorney Jerry Dahl on deck for questions if needed. So last time, as you may recall, I was here to discuss the tobacco ordinance in December 2019. And at that time, we went through several considerations for City Council to provide direction regarding this future ordinance. The summary at that time was to move forward with an ordinance that included the following. So minimum age to purchase tobacco would be 21, minimum age to sell tobacco would be 18, no tobacco products would be available to customers via self-service, products would not be sold via mobile conveyance, which is delivery, and then licensees would have proactive enforcement checks. For the items that did not receive consensus that evening, it was requested that I return with additional information, which is first, the estimated cost of implementing the licensing program, whether or not it would make sense to require tobacco retailers to be at least 500 feet from a school, information regarding language and penalties for selling tobacco without a license, and then finally, whether or not fines could go toward education related to tobacco use. So I'm just going to pick up where we left off, and I'll first provide an update on the items related to House Bill 1001, and then following that, I'll provide a general summary of kind of the whole regulatory environment, and then ask for direction on those remaining topic areas, as well as those proposed regulations to include in a future ordinance. So first things first, for House Bill 1001, I am going to go over that one first, since it does have impacts and some of the updates that I'll be providing. So the bill, which regulates the retail of cigarettes, tobacco, and nicotine products in Colorado, it was passed in July of 2020. And to summarize that, all retailers who sell cigarettes, tobacco products, or nicotine products are now required to obtain a state license. Additionally, the minimum age for the sale of these products across the state has already been increased from 18 to 21 years of age. As Patrick mentioned, we are in a pandemic, so this bill was initially planned to be effective in July 2021. However, due to the pandemic, the program has been paused. So at this time, we don't have an estimated date on the state's official rollout. However, the state does plan to work in partnership with local agencies in order to develop a plan to regulate these businesses. So moving on to the updates from the last meeting. First, with implementation costs, in December, council provided direction to move forward with the tobacco retailer licensing, and then asked for direction or asked for an estimation on what it would cost to implement that program. So I worked with Jefferson County Public Health and the Wheat Ridge Police Department to estimate the cost to initiate, administer, and enforce a tobacco retailer license program. And with the Department of Revenue has an estimated number of tobacco retailers in Wheat Ridge to be of 70 to 80. So with that number in mind, the administrative burden would be approximately $300 per retailer in the first year, and then $250 ongoing. So for this item, staff will be seeking direction from City Council on the initial and renewal license fees. Regarding separation requirements, the question that came up last time was whether or not it made sense to impose distance requirements for retailers as they relate to schools. However, through the passage of House Bill 1001, it is now required that there is a 500-foot perimeter for tobacco retail establishments to be separated from schools, and the grandfather clause is included. And although it does seem to kind of be a moot point right now, it is worth noting that Jefferson County Public Health did research the topic and did find that schools were with more stores in walking distance do have higher smoking prevalences than schools with fewer retailers nearby. Additionally, some communities in Colorado have set the local license to add other provisions related to youth-oriented facilities such as playgrounds or recreation centers. So first, the City Council may consider extending the minimum perimeter to be a greater distance than 500 feet from schools. And then you may also, or separately, add a provision to the ordinance to include a separation from other youth-oriented facilities, which would include our recreation center. Third, on penalties, you may recall that the discussion that took place last time was how the city should penalize bad actors. The state has since put forth a penalty matrix that is mostly fee-based, and that was included as part of your council packet. Jefferson County Public Health does continue to recommend that the best practice approach for local agencies would be the suspension and revocation graduated policy rather than creating a city-imposed fine. However, City Council may choose to impose fines or suspensions or both. So that is up for discussion tonight. And then finally, for the allocation of fine revenues, City Council did ask about whether or not fines could be utilized for tobacco-related education. And the short answer is no, it couldn't, and that's due to TABOR restrictions. So this may impact City Council's thought process on whether or not to impose fines in general. In summary, I'm just going to lay out now the proposed regulations to include both the direction that was previously received as well as the content from House Bill 1001. And so the summary of what a future ordinance could look like would be that the minimum age to purchase tobacco would be 21, minimum age to sell 18. The new tobacco retail licensees would be at least 500 feet from schools, with retailers that are closer currently would be grandfathered in. Pending council direction, youth populated areas would include playgrounds and recreation centers. No license shall be issued to a tobacco retailer at a location other than a fixed location, so no mobile vending. And no tobacco products would be available to customers via self-service, and that would include vending machines. So tonight, staff is asking for consensus on the regulatory framework provided, and I'm also asking for specific direction on 1, the recommended cost of implementing the licensing program. 2, whether or not to require tobacco retailers to be more than 500 feet from a school. 3, what the penalty should be for tobaccos operating with for tobacco retailers that are being bad actors. And then finally, whether or not City Council would want to investigate additional items related to education surrounding tobacco use. So staff does recommend that council direct staff to bring forward an ordinance on first reading. And this would revise Chapter 11 of the City Municipal Code to include the proposed regulation as well as any changes related to additional direction provided. So I will now turn it over to Ellen Stern. And following Ellen's brief presentation, we will both be available for questions.
Thank you. Ms.
Thank
Stern.
you. Thank you, Mayor. Really nice to be with you all tonight. As said earlier, I'm Ellen Stern. I'm a tobacco policy specialist with Jefferson County Public Health. First of all, thank you all so much for your service and leadership. And I just really appreciate you all are taking some time to think about prioritizing youth tobacco work in Wheat Ridge. I won't rehash what has already been shared in previous work sessions from the department, but I just want to reiterate our support in general for local tobacco retail licensing and codifying the age of sales to 21 locally in Wheat Ridge. I'll give a couple brief comments, and I'm happy to answer questions, as Marianne said in the discussion tonight. So research has shown around the country that those communities that have adopted tobacco retail licensing have shown a reduced teen smoking and vaping rates. So in Minnesota, for example, where there's 14 communities that have local licensing, adolescent use of tobacco products dropped by 28%, and the successful underage purchases dropped from 39% to 5%. I guess you all are probably very familiar with liquor licensing and marijuana licensing. And so I know there's probably a lot of questions tonight about kind of the dual nature of what we're proposing here today, which is a local license on top of a state license, and would just submit that those other two categories of consumer products already have these same structures of a local and state license for age-restricted sales. Tobacco has not had widespread local licensing or state licensing until recent years. The state actually used to penalize local communities who wanted to regulate or license cigarette retailers. This preemption provision was removed about 2 years ago, and this past year, as Marianne said, 1001 was passed to build further on tobacco prevention efforts. Colorado was only one of 10 states that didn't have statewide tobacco licensing previously. And while we applaud the state for their work on this, we do continue to advocate for local licensing, and we've been proud to partner with a number of communities in Jefferson County to that end in recent years, as you see in your packet. If council wants to move forward with an ordinance, a few of the provisions we would just highlight. Marianne has included them in detail in the packet. The annual licensing fee for tobacco retailers, with the cost being adequate to ensure a strong system with retailer education, administration of the license, and funds for 2 compliance checks a year. And that would not be an addition to the state 2 compliance checks. It wouldn't be in lieu of that. So as Marianne said in the packet, several communities have the licensing fee in the range that you all are considering, the $200 to $300 per year. And as she said as well, the suspension and revocation system is our preferred approach because they can be more influential in changing behavior and making sure that retailers are educated about the law. Third, we would just encourage monitoring and compliance with the law. This could look like an annual report or something to that effect, where there's just some transparency about the violations, and that will really help inform your work on council and the public about tobacco control efforts in Wheat Ridge. And then finally, as really just an applause to you all for the work that you all have been doing around racial equity conversations in Wheat Ridge. As a connector to that work, we know that tobacco use disproportionately impacts lower income communities and communities of color. And as we know that tobacco retail licensing can be a foundation for a health equity approach to make progress not only in reducing teen tobacco use, but consequently a lifetime of tobacco use. So I'll just conclude by saying that we support this proposal and moving forward, and we do think council can strike the right balance between establishing an effective local youth tobacco prevention strategy and setting a reasonable licensing fees on businesses that works in tandem with the state program once it rolls out. Thanks so much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any more detailed questions about the contours of the proposal.
Pardon me. Thank you, Ms. Stern and Ms. Schilling, for that presentation. We will open it up to questions from council. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is regarding the tandem licensing of both the state and the local agencies. And has there been any research regarding the effectiveness of having 2 different entities regulate the same industry, or if one entity were to regulate that industry, does that change the effectiveness at all, or is there a way to determine that delta?
Thank you. That's a great question. I don't know that there has been in Colorado specifically, since it's such a new kind of provision for communities to be enacting local tobacco retailing. I'd be happy to get back to you and share. I think from our perspective, the fee is capped at the state level in Colorado at $400, and it's not yet set, so we don't know what it's going to be. They're able to hire about 12 FTE to do all of the enforcement in the state. And so our greatest concern is that enforcement is not going to be adequate to cover, as Marianne said, there's 80 retailers just in Wheat Ridge alone to cover the entire state. And so we do think that, like alcohol sales in Colorado, which have been, and perhaps the police department can speak to this as well in terms of the effectiveness of working in collaboration with the state and leveraging each other's resources and capacities to make sure that people are abiding by the law.
And my follow-up question is regarding enforcement, and within the licensure fee that we're looking at, does that contemplate efforts towards enforcement, or is this passive enforcement, or how does the enforcement element come into play within the city's licensure program?
I'll ask Division Chief Lorenz to add on to this, but the first thing is that this would include 2 proactive enforcement checks, which is what we agreed upon last time in December. And the cost of the license does include the cost of what it would take to do those 2 enforcements per year.
Per 2 enforcements per shop?
Per year.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if I have that much more to add. There would be two compliance checks per year per retail establishment, and if there is a violation, then there's an additional visit within 3 to 5 months, something like that, to do another compliance check on that particular property.
Thank you.
Pardon me, would we need to add staff in order to accomplish these tasks? Pardon me.
And the chief has had some conversations with our special enforcement unit, so maybe he might have a comment there. My understanding is that we can cover that kind of that level of compliance check at this time.
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor, I might add to that if you don't mind.
Really?
In that conversation, it's really, it's about resource management there. That person being tasked with a number of different sort of licensing efforts is going, that's probably going to put less emphasis on other areas. So the question is going to be, where do we want to put our emphasis as a department and as a city? So you ask if we need more people. The short answer is no. It's just going to probably detract from some of our other enforcement efforts if we don't add anybody, if that helps you out.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarity. Additional questions, Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is, in the memo, it says for local licensing, JCPH, Jefferson County Public Health recommends the following best practices related to retailer infractions, and it goes on to tell about what the first violation through the 4th violation, what happens with those violations. These best practices is this what the other local municipalities are doing? Is it kind of the same thing? Is this what the state's doing, or like, where did they come from?
Thank you. I'm happy to answer that, Marianne. Yes, that is based on what other communities around the country have done. But I think we're open if there's discussion from the retailer community that this isn't what looks best for them. I think we can talk about that. That to us is the most effective, is the suspension and revocation process. The state has really pursued a fine-based strategy. If a local retailer and there's a local license that's enacted in that community has their license suspended, that does translate to the state, and there's specific language in the state law around the state license also being suspended.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Regarding the fine process, I'm in agreement with the recommendations from Jefferson County Public Health that a revocation process, suspension and revocation would really have the most impact. I'm concerned, if a retailer is seeing enough revenue from underage sales and thinks they can get away with it, then they're going to take their risk on that. Whereas if they risk losing all of their cigarette sales to, everyone legally, then I think that's a stronger motivation. I would support maybe the first violation being a fine, and then moving to suspension on the second. Oftentimes, I suspect that we're dealing more with maybe a management issue on the first one, and but on the second one, for them to understand the seriousness of it. So I definitely support impacting their ability to sell, but would support the first one to be a fine, and then on the second one, move to suspension towards revocation.
Ms. Weaver, and then Ms. Hutchinson.
I just want to support that. I think that's a great solution regarding the fine and then going to solution. Thank you, Ms. Hulty.
Thank you, and Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I look at the packet that was sent out, and there are like 8 infractions that a real retailer can have. And then the penalties go anywhere from 3 different penalties to 5 penalties. Seriously, are we wanting to stop what is going on? That is the question. So they know what's going on. So to have retailers get 5 chances is ridiculous to me. They should have 2 chances. They already know what's going on. So you get a penalty, and then again, if you're found to not be doing what is right, then you're suspended. And I get it about businesses and having retail and all this, but it's about what do we want to do here? What's the bottom line? It's about vaping. And I also have a question. What about the online sales of vaping that are going on in this Wheat Ridge area? Because you can Google it, you go on there, and it asks, are you over 21 or under 21? If you're over 21, you go to the website, okay? What about those things that are selling? Everybody's doing online everywhere now. So just because we have retailers here, this stuff is still being sold locally online, and there's no addresses or anything. Who's following up on that? That's just my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stern.
Thank you for the question. So the state law does contemplate more regulations around online sales, but the rules, as Marianne said, have not yet been set up. And I actually talked with the Department of Revenue on Friday, and they said that is going to be one of their biggest challenges because it is a big universe of retailers and figuring out how, age verification and that whole process. It's definitely a big issue, and they're going to try to tackle it with the rulemaking process, but it's unknown when they'll restart those conversations at the state.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in the memo, there is a list of infractions and then penalties, and these are the ones by the state. And then after that, it goes on to have the recommended, best practices. Are the recommended best practices is that considered for all these infractions? So let's say the recommended best practice for first violation within a 3-year period is that you're suspended from selling tobacco for 7 days. Would that be if you fail to put up a proper warning sign in your store? Would that be the same? So all infractions get treated all the same, basically.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we got into that deep of a discussion on those the last time we discussed this. So maybe that's something we need to talk about a little bit further. I think it could be either if they violate any one of those infractions that are in state law that they would get a violation, or city council could choose which ones of those would constitute a violation. I don't think we've made that decision yet, Ms. Hoppy.
Okay, I think that I would be in support of our first violation being a fine and then moving through the list of violations as recommended, and for then it to be for all of the infractions, for any infraction. But if the first violation is suspended for 7 days, and that is simply for an infraction of not having a proper warning sign posted, then I think we need to kind of pick it apart. So I think I'll just kind of see where everybody lands with what they think the first violation should be.
Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is regarding the connection between the state and the local agency and the fines that are charged. Who receives those fines? If you receive a first warning from the state, does that equal a first warning from the city? And how do those work in tandem? Do they have to pay both a state fine and a local fine during the first violation, or how do those work in concert?
I think that, Mr. Urban, the current structure is the fines would only be associated to the state. So the state would receive the revenue. If the city council wants to go with just a suspension revocation tiered structure, the city wouldn't receive any fines unless it sounds like we're getting support for first violation as a fine. So the city would receive that fine amount, but in the chart, in the table above that paragraph, that's all goes to the state, is my understanding. The city wouldn't receive any of that.
And so if a City Wheat Ridge licensed retailer were to receive a violation from the state, are we notified of that violation? And does that constitute a first violation on our part, or how does that work?
It's a good question. And I don't, as Ellen and Marianne mentioned, the state doesn't have the implementation process in place yet, but I think we could put that in our code, in our ordinance, that if they receive a fine from the state, and I'm sure that's going to be public record, I would believe, but I'm not 100% sure on that would be a city first violation also. I think we'd have to write that in our ordinance.
Yeah, I guess I would want to make sure that they are run in tandem, that you don't get 5 chances with the city and then 5 chances with the state. And if the state can provide us some sort of tickler or notification if a licensee has received violation, that would help us figure out how we deal with it. So that there's not 2 different systems going at the same time that aren't talking to each other. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Ms. Stern?
Thank you. Yes, so in my conversation with the Department of Revenue, they very much plan to have a database. Again, our great police leaders here can probably speak to the liquor enforcement process, but where there will be kind of bi-directional communication between the local and state. And I don't have anything to add on the fines. Patrick got that all correctly in terms of who receives the money if there's a violation.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen, and then Jim Lorenz.
Thank you.
That's true. And as far as liquor goes, we're notified when there's a state violation. It counts towards a Wheat Ridge licensing issue. I'm assuming it would run the same way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
Lawrence read my mind and answered the question I was going to ask. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Additional questions and discussion?
You have Val down there.
Ms. Noslebeck.
Hi. Just wanted to ask about, and this might be a question for Ellen, like the outreach that's been done to retailers. Are retailers, especially responsible retailers, overarchingly okay with licensing because they already have these practices in place? And then I think a question for Marianne or anybody really is, in the city, how are our retailers, are they being prepared for this, and what's kind of their reaction?
Thank you for the question. I have not done any direct outreach in the last several months that I started at JCPH, but I know that at the state level, there was direct engagement. It was a bipartisan bill. The tobacco industry and the retail industry, the convenience store owners and so forth were very active in the discussions, and it was amended several times throughout to get a consensus bill through. So I guess from a statewide perspective, the retail environment has been very engaged in those conversations. And since Colorado was one of the last states to enact this type of policy, I think they saw the writing on the wall that tobacco licensing was coming to Colorado.
And Val, to answer your question, locally, we haven't done any outreach specifically to our local businesses, but that could be something that based on city council direction, we could make that part of the process even before an ordinance is brought forward, if you want that to be a next step to get feedback before an ordinance is drafted, or just invite them to the discussion when it becomes to public hearing.
Thank you. Additional discussion? Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have just a question regarding, this is a different subject, but it's about the liquor stores. If the state makes a complaint and the city goes in, what happens then to what does the city do about that? What do you do with the liquor store that has sold liquor to underage people or whatever? What happens?
Our city clerk might be able to address that. We have a liquor authority, Ms. Hutchinson, that deals with any of those issues, but maybe Steve could speak to that.
Not getting into the administrative or legal details, they are brought before the Liquor Authority Board, which is 8 local residents who are delegated the authority to oversee liquor licensing in Wheat Ridge. And the board can impose suspensions of their license, their right to sell liquor for anywhere from a day to a week or longer if necessary. They can revoke their license to sell liquor here in the city if they are repeat offenders. Typically, when the PD does a sting operation and retailers are alleged to have sold alcoholic beverages to a minor, the penalty is a suspension of 1 or 2 days, followed by an additional 3 or 4 days held in abeyance. So if there's a second offense, they get the additional penalty tacked on to the penalty that was held in abeyance. So the first offense costs them a day or 2 of liquor sales, alcoholic beverage sales. After that, it gets more and more stringent. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I'm just thinking what we're doing here tonight is addressing the issue of vaping. Do we want to push it down the road, or do we just want to kind of figure this out? Because it seems like the state doesn't have, a lot of answers and things. I mean, like online sales, that we don't have an answer and all this kind of stuff. Are we really going to settle anything here? Because this is a huge issue. And, when I see that a penalty retailers can have 5 chances. Seriously, why do retailers get that many chances? They know exactly what's going on. To think that the retailers in Wheat Ridge don't, yeah, they do. They know exactly. So they just push it. We have our police that will go in twice a year to do like a stop-in check. Maybe the state will. How are we going to know what's going on? The issue is we want to decrease the vaping. How do we do that? And we just give chance after chance after chance. And, that's a lot of administrative costs. And who's following up on this? If they knew from the very get-go, you get these many chances and this is what it is, you'd see they'd buck up. That's what I think. We just give them more and more chances. We don't know. There's no answers from the state. We don't have anything. We're just flying blind. So, I mean, I want to see this kind of stopping where underage people are being able to get it. I get it about the 21-year-old age to be able to buy it, but also let me also say this. People who go into the military are 18. People who go into the military, they do smoke and things like that because of the stress and things like that. So that's another question. You're in the military, but you can't buy cigarettes and stuff or anything else. That's another issue. But do we want to get a handle on this here, or are we just going to pass it down the road? I've never seen this before where we give 5 chances for anything. I mean, I'm just like, okay, whatever. We're not going to be able to track it. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Lorenz, you had your hand up.
I was just going to add on to what the city clerk said. There is a separate system of criminal charges that go to county court. We write summonses for, say, a person that is selling illegal products. That's a charge and that person may not be associated with the licensee. So there are several charges that get written. They go to court, and then the other side is to deal with the liquor board.
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to bring up a couple of the other things under consideration tonight. One of the things that we're looking at is whether or not to expand beyond the 500 feet to 1,000 feet. And you know, I've done, just through some of my observations for bike ped stuff, I've spent a lot of time sitting on the corner of 38th and Kipling, observing the middle school and high school traffic that goes through there before and after school. And you know, 500 feet is not a particularly great distance from a school property, and I would definitely support, considering that we're grandfathering existing businesses, I would support extending that to 1,000 feet, because they get out of school and they really immediately just go into the closest convenience store. And a lot of convenience stores have that, they only allow so many students in at a time, and they try and do their best to manage some of those impacts. But I would support 1,000 foot from any retailer, and then also including youth activity centers, because I think, you know, we have to recognize we've got really great parks and recreation in the city. And, you know, it is, as we heard from the statistics tonight from Ms. Odom and Ms. Stern, that, you know, the exposure and being around it leads to use that, as they get older, you know, gets to more and more serious use. So, you know, I want to be reasonable with our businesses, but, you know, as Ms. Hutchinson said, we're trying to put a public health issue here, and you know, the vaping's everywhere, and then it's in our parks. And so yeah, I'm supportive of extending to 1,000 feet and including youth activity centers. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dozman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just for the sake of standardizing this policy, I think that following HB 20 would be beneficial as far as like the violations go. And then I think the more stringent best practices in our packet from JCPH as far as suspension and revocation, I think that is amenable as well. And to Councilmember Hulteen's point, as far as, you know, grandfathered in and then having a longer distance from either youth activities or schools, would that follow the business or would that follow the property? Because we've seen a lot of instances in which there's been like turnover at our convenience stores. So if a new owner comes in and buys that same convenience store, but it's still a convenience store, will they no longer be grandfathered in? Because I'm a little concerned about that. And I don't know how many, or if you know the number of businesses that are within that range that are currently selling tobacco.
Great question. I don't know, maybe Mr. Dahl could address that. I'm not sure if that's something council has discretion to write into an ordinance, that they're either grandfathered in or not based on a new licensee?
Yeah, I think that you can, because this is a business license. It's not really the same as a use that, a permanent use that's granted to a property, and the property owner has built, structures in reliance on that use. It's a business license really for one product line for that particular licensee who's been in business and is selling that product line. So a different business, I don't think has the, you can make it run with the property, but that would mean you've got property forever at that location that can sell. And I think it's within your power to say it runs only with the licensee, whoever the licensee was at the time you create this system.
Okay, and then Patrick, do you have a number of businesses within that vicinity, like that 500 feet vicinity currently?
I don't think we've pulled that up. Marianne, I don't think we have. As she mentioned earlier, we do have about 80 some in the city, but apologize, we don't have that number. We can pull that up for our next discussion if you'd like.
Okay, and then how does this affect like cigar shops? Because I know we have at least 2 in Wheat Ridge, and I believe at least one of them allows for like smoking in the shop. So I mean, how would that work?
I think cigar shops are allowed to have smoking within the shop if that's their main revenue source of selling cigars. But if it's a bar with just a box of cigars and they're selling them, that's not allowed. So I believe cigar shops would be exempt from that portion, but we're not talking about that here. I'm not sure they're a tobacco user and they'd have to get a license, I'm assuming, unless you want to exempt cigar shops that have a certain percentage of their business from only cigars. I suppose you could put that in ordinance also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have Ms. Hoppy and then Mr. Stites.
On the grandfathered in, whether that runs with the business owner or with the business, I guess what I would, there are 3, there are 2 gas stations like right by our rec center currently. And I don't know if those would fall within the 1,000 feet or not. But let's say that they're going to sell that business. It would be really hard for them probably to sell that business if that new business owner couldn't get a few of the licensings that they need. So the tobacco licensing, they can sell alcohol now, the beer and I think it's just beer and seltzers right now, but potentially wine down the road licensing. So that would affect kind of like the sale of that. So I'm just wondering how many of those businesses would we affect if we extended the 1,000 feet. What you're saying is we don't have that information right now, but if that is something we could maybe get some information on in the future.
Yeah, we can pull that information up. I'm not sure if we have a similar concept with liquor. I don't know if Dahl or our city clerk knows with grandfathering in, or I believe the liquor license runs with the licensee, not a property. Or is that true?
Yes. But
That's
you
right.
can sell it with the business. What happens then is a transfer of the license. So there's a formal process for that because, of course, the new liquor licensee has to pass the same stringent regulations that the former licensee had.
And of course, the liquor licensing authority, Steve's point's a good one. The liquor licensing authority has the ability to say no to a transfer to a new licensee. So that's very different than the license simply running with that business or running with that property automatically.
And for somewhat of a consistency purpose, I would I would recommend if we could make some of these regulations as similar to other licenses that we have, just so that I mean, it just becomes cumbersome and it's confusing for the businesses if it's that much different for all the different licenses they have. Council has a lot of discretion here, I think, but just, think about enforcement of this 20 years down the road when we're all gone and somebody has to look at this and say, what are we supposed to do?
In that same vein, Division Chief Lawrence comments a few moments ago brought another issue to mind. Right now, if I am a clerk in a convenience store and I sell a 6-pack of beer to a minor, then that citation that Jim was talking about is for the person who sold the beer. But my point is that the licensee is also held accountable for that. The licensee is brought before the Liquor Authority Board. So the question that comes up here is, if a convenience store clerk sells tobacco to an underage individual, do they get cited with a municipal criminal offense? Or is the business licensee accountable for that, or both? And I think if we don't make that clear in the ordinance, we'll have another discrepancy that we're trying to deal with. I would hate to see someone who is a clerk get fined for selling tobacco and let the licensee walk. Because under liquor law, you have to train your staff to check IDs, etc. So they're already accustomed to doing that. Let's just think about putting that in the code.
Thank you. I have Mr. Stites, Ms. Hoppy, Ms. Dozman, and then Ms. Hutchinson in that order. So Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, my concerns were similar to Ms. Hoppy's, that we have a lot of existing businesses that seem like they kind of need licenses like that near Everett and near Wheat Ridge Rec Center and some of the parks and things like that. So if those businesses like Circle K sells and a new one comes in, I feel like not that it should be automatically able to transfer, but the eligibility of that location should maybe be able to transfer or be grandfathered in. And I wonder if maybe we can put some of this towards the liquor authority as well, because a lot of the regulations will be the same. So maybe what Patrick just said, is there some way that we can get the liquor authority and make it more like an alcohol and liquor, or tobacco and liquor authority involved in that licensing or in that continuation of that? Is that something we can do, or are we too far in this process to go back to that? I don't know who would answer that question.
Looked like a question. I'm not sure.
That is a question. I don't know who would answer it though.
Does anyone have that answer?
You could certainly assign the licensing function to the liquor authority, but right now our business licenses are assigned to the treasurer's office. And until you get to the point where there's a lot of subjective value judgments being made, and the liquor authority makes those subjective value judgments, like the good moral character of the applicant and the needs and desires of the neighborhood. Those are the two key things that the liquor authority investigates. And that's really not as much the case here. For this arena is more objective and more mechanical. And again, it's up to the council, but it would seem to me that it might be still continue to be housed best in the office of the treasurer, because it's a business licensing matter in a kind of mechanical way. That's my thought about that.
The other fact about that is that the Liquor Authority Board's lawful authority comes from the Colorado Revised Statutes. I have not looked at this new tobacco regulation statute, so I have no idea whether we could in fact give them that authority or create a tobacco authority board or liquor and tobacco authority board.
Because you're a home rule city. You're a home rule city, and you've got the ability to create. You're not limited by state statute in that regard. You're a home rule city, so you can make the decision of who to assign it to.
Thank you. Okay, I have Ms. Hoppy, Ms. Dozman, and Ms. Hutchinson.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So would we to be able to say something like the new business owner can have a transfer of the licensing, kind of like with the liquor licensing, but then they have to apply for the actual license themselves, the new business owner, as long as the business stays congruently in business. So if, let's say, there's a convenience store on 38th Avenue that's empty, and it went out of business after the 7-Eleven across the street opened up. So that's been empty for a very long time. But if somebody goes and decides to open a convenience store in that spot, and it's within the 1,000 feet or 500 feet that we decide, then we would say, nope, sorry, you can't. It's already been closed. There's all new regulations. However, if somebody were to buy the 7-Eleven and it stays open and it keeps working, or it keeps open and selling, then they would be able to transfer it. So if there's a loss of business, if there's a lack of business activity, then could we say, because of the lack of business activity, this can no longer be grandfathered in?
Yes, it's all in the drafting, but you clearly have broad authority here to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Dozeman, and then Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to kind of expand on some of the comments that Patrick made, and like where I'm leading, and a lot of this is trying to be as standardized as possible with this statewide statute, as well as surrounding municipalities and some of the county suggestions, just so we don't have so many variances amongst cities. And granted, you know, we have that home rule municipality, and we have the ability to enact more stringent policies. But I think that as of right now, given how much we have going on, especially with COVID and our retail businesses not really being necessarily a part of this conversation at this point in time, I think that like creating, you know, a 500-foot distance and following the HB 20 recommendations and the JCPH recommendations, and implementing those right now, and moving forward with those would be beneficial. And I would really like to see either the license be able to run concurrent with the property. We just have a ton of convenience stores that I think would fall within 1,000 feet of schools and parks and recreation centers, and so I'm leaning more towards the 500-foot regulation as opposed to 1,000-foot, until we better have those numbers and can determine, you know, how many of the convenience stores that sell tobacco products would fall within that 500 and 1,000-foot vicinity. And I know this is a really tough issue, and so we could also, like, the 21 age limit is like, that's set by Colorado statute, so like we have to adhere to that, right? Okay. And then we had originally also talked in our former study session about like marketing, flavors, and like where the products would be located, like they had to be behind the counter. And I don't really see that as a part of the conversation as much now. Are we still moving towards any of those?
I think we had decided in the end not to move forward with those areas.
Okay.
Just what's in the memo currently today is what was the final consensus.
Okay, that works.
The behind the counter piece was enacted by the state, so that is active, no self-serve, and that includes what is the word?
Vending machines.
Thank you. It includes vending machines. But Patrick is right that we did not include the flavored aspect last time.
Okay, so like there's not going to be able to be any products like on the counter, you know, because like I've noticed that, you know, like the little vapes on the counter when you go to purchase. So those will have to be behind the counter now. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I think of the convenience stores that have been around, the buildings that have been around for years and years and things like that, okay, they didn't have vaping then. We have vaping now. So we got to change. And it's kind of like, how far away from a school sorry, that was my clock, is pot supposed to be? Like 1,000 feet?
Yes,
think
marijuana
1,000
is 1,000 feet.
Correct. Why is all the differences in the feet between pot, vaping, liquor, whatever? I mean, it should be just kind of regular. This is like a public health issue. And I know that the businesses have been there and things like that, but also they're going to pick up on anything that's out there that's brand new. Vaping wasn't there serious with that Conoco at 38th and Kipling many years ago. This has just kind of come up, and this is a way for them to make revenue and things like that. But I know kids aren't in school now and things, but it's, do we want to kind of stop this? Having different rules for every different kind of thing is like, I don't know how people can follow it. How can we regulate it? It should be just kind of regular. We think about the students and what happens to them, and 1,000 feet from a playground, a rec center, school should be just like regular. What's the problem? I'm not worried about the business not making money. They made money before vaping. So that's just I think all the different rules for every different chemical that's out there is, who's going to trace it?
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to try to find a few consensuses, but I saw Ms. Hulteen's hand up, so I'll ask her if she would like to go first.
Okay, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you, everyone. I was just going to actually just express my support for Ms. Hoppy's suggestion that we let the licensing grandfather with the land, and if there's a 1-year dormancy, then they lose that grandfathering. And I think, you know, at this point, the convenience stores know their locations, and, you know, we're, I would say, fairly saturated with convenience stores. So, you know, I would love to encourage, I would love to see old convenience stores turn into new uses. So I think that that's a respectful way of, if a business ownership turns over, or, you know, if they relicense under a different name, that, you know, I think we should be supporting them and protecting them. And it's, you know, they're a convenience store, they're good for our community in a lot of other ways. And I think the other regulations here are going to really tamp down on the, you know, visibility and accessibility. You know, as for comparing the licensing of this to liquor licensing, you know, the difference is we don't have kids, you know, super visibly walking through our parks and our communities vaping, and, you know, it's not as big and visible. And it's I think I understand the desire for consistency, both from the city side and working with our business community to have a little bit more consistency. But, you know, I just don't think it's the same thing as how alcohol is sold. I mean, alcohol is usually, you know, it's handled in a very different way and has been around for a lot longer in terms of regulatory environment. So, so I don't know if I necessarily see them together, and I'm okay with a more like regulated environment around the vaping and tobacco products, because we're stepping into it right now and it's pretty pervasive. So thank you, Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy. I'll return the floor to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to see if we have consensus to implement a licensing program for $300, the initial fee, and $250 for renewal fees.
Okay, it looks like we have consensus on that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to see if we can find consensus to allow grandfathering, but with no business activity for 1 year, then the location will no longer be considered for a grandfathering.
So the license runs with the property unless it's dormant for 1 year?
Yes, then no grandfather.
Looks like we have consensus on that.
Because we are going to allow the license to run with the property, I'd like to ask for consensus that any new tobacco licensing or anyone who has lost their opportunity for grandfathering will be 1,000 feet from 1,000 feet from schools, and to extend that to our recreation center.
School and recreation center, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like we have consensus there.
Can I get a clarification on that, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, sure, certainly.
You just want it to be the recreation center, or do you want to include Anderson Park Recreation Center also, or just the main recreation
Sorry,
center?
both recreation centers. I don't want to include the parks necessarily, but both of the recreation centers.
Okay.
And do we have a standard measuring device for that? Is that as the crow flies or as the pedestrian walks?
We've used both. I think we changed it for marijuana to pedestrian walk. Should we keep it the same? Or is it crow's fly? No, I think it was pedestrian. We changed it, didn't we, Mr. Dahl? Do you remember?
Yeah, we did. And that's really the better measure, because you're trying to affect, people's movement, really.
Okay. Continue, Ms. Hoppy, or I've got Ms. Dozman with a question, unless you're at a stopping point there.
Go ahead, Ms. Dozman.
Ms. Dozman.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess my question for that would be, does that also include like the active adult center and like other public buildings such as, libraries, or is it just like the 2 recreation centers? Okay.
Looks like the 2 rec centers.
All right.
Okay, Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to see if we can find consensus for the penalties for selling tobacco without a license to be the first penalty would be a $500 fine. The second penalty within a 3-year would be suspended for 7 days. The third penalty within a 3-year would be suspended for 30 days. The fourth, violation, those are all violations. The fourth violation within a 3-year period is you're suspended for 1 year. And the fifth violation within a 3-year period is you are revoked and the license will be deemed ineligible to apply for a tobacco retail license for 2 years.
I have a question.
Okay, question, Mr. Urban?
Would that be violations of the city licensing program and the state licensing program, either or?
Good clarification. Thank you, Mr. Urban. I think that it should be in any violation, whether it is state or city violation.
So any one of those infractions listed in the table?
Any one of the infractions, which is why I started with the very first one would be a fine. The rest of them are what was suggested in the memo for the best practices for retailer infractions, just with the numbers changed. So instead of the first violation, it's now the second violation.
The only infractions we have, though, are what's listed in the state bill at this point. The city doesn't have any separate infractions. So just to make sure everybody understands that.
Okay, let's see a show of hands on that. If that's clear to everyone, a show of hands on consensus on that. No, we have consensus on that.
I just wanted a clarification on that. So we'll have to carry the penalties of the state. So every infraction would come with a fine, and then we're going to place the additional suspensions and revocations on top of all of them.
Good question for clarification. No, every infraction that's listed is as an infraction, but it's not the same penalties. So as suggested in the memo for the best practices would be to follow the violations that were suggested, but not to have additional fees on top of that. So our first violation is a fee, and then beyond that, the violations are what is in the memo right underneath the list of infractions, but it does not include the penalties. So
Right. So
What I was saying is sale of tobacco products or nicotine products to persons under 21. The state says the first one is going to be $250 to $500. Well, they have to pay that to the state, but that wouldn't be paid to us. They would pay $500 to us. But then their second one would be, they would just be suspended for 7 days.
Okay, thank you. So so they'll have to pay the state fine, and then they'll have to pay our fine, and it'll carry the suspension and revocations. Okay. I agree with that in the respect for most of the infractions. I think the warning sign violations, I think some of these are less, I don't know, they're not as heavy in my mind as far as needing the sort of penalties of suspension. And how long will they have to come in to compliance? And are we going to be implementing this before the state of Colorado?
Ms. Hoppy.
I was just going to ask for a consensus for us to look to run in compliance along with the state. So to try to be in compliance by July 2021. However, knowing that the state, that we don't know if they're going to meet that deadline, having some sort of flexibility when we come to our second reading to be able to change that date if needed.
Ms. Stern, did you have a clarification there that you?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, we should know more in March or April from the state about whether or not they'll meet that July 1st deadline. And so happy to stay in contact and share any updates from the state as they come available.
So this would be consensus to follow the state's guidelines. And Mr. Urban, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question is regarding a new business that opens tomorrow to sell tobacco within that limit, or they have until July next year to get regulated. So do we need any kind of moratorium or ability to restrict the new locations that would sell tobacco between now and then, or how is that gap or period covered?
Yeah, good question. I guess if this doesn't become effective until July or later, it's free reign until then, unless you want to put a moratorium on it.
Well, I guess one question would be, as it relates to the grandfathering, what kind of parameters are around the definition of grandfathering? Is it that they've been selling for the past 2 years, or do we have an ability to write our own grandfathering clause?
Mr. Dahl, do you know what constitutes grandfather?
Typically, the way ordinances are written is if you're in business or in place with a lawful activity on the effective date of the ordinance, and you want to grant grandfathering, then that's the measuring tool you make, because it's pretty easy to determine that. I think it would not be impossible, but more difficult to say you needed to be in business on this date, and you have to have been in business for X days before that date. That requires a lot more staff research. Kind of bright line test for grandfathering, and most times that it's used in statutes and ordinances is, were you in place and legally in place on the date of effectiveness?
Thank you, Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you. I'm curious. I know a lot of what we're talking about here, we're recognizing that this is a program and enforcement that would need to be communicated to the retailers, and we need to let them know it's in place and how it's going to be enforced. Is there what is our timing with the city for businesses to renew their licenses every year? I'm assuming it's a January 1st.
I think they're due at the end. They're due by the end of January. I'm sorry, Allie can answer that.
Yeah. Our code, they pay just the business license fee by the end of January, and then after that, our code talks about how late they are, and then the fee going up. So business licenses are due in January.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's any way to piggyback some of the licensing communication to let businesses know that would be impacted that this is coming, since we're just recognizing there's a lot of business communication issues going on here.
We usually send a tax reporter out at the end of it's usually now November, I think December, something that goes out that reminds all businesses that they need to renew and if there's any changes in tax law. So I'm not sure if we could get it out with that mailing. It's since nothing's been officially adopted at this point. I don't know, maybe Allie, has that gone out yet? Or are we still planning to do one this year?
We're sending out renewal minders, and we're sort of pivoting to online. And so one thing we have been doing is we've gone on a really aggressive email collection campaign in the last 6 months. And so, I do think that we actually have some better tools at our disposal to quickly reach businesses when we are ready.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does City Council get any report about how this is all going as far as, businesses that have been, had 3 violations or something like that? I don't know if is that public knowledge or not, or it's just private for them and they just keep on going, doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah, we could always, that's at the discretion of the city council, if you'd like to just come back to report out on enforcement. And I don't know, Mr. Dolph, we'd actually provide specific business names, or we could just give you summaries. I don't know. I don't think it would be confidential.
No, it's not confidential commercial information necessarily, but for the purposes of what council needs, probably numbers of businesses in given categories, et cetera, are all you really need. I try to disclose less when you don't disclose no more than necessary to serve the purpose. So while we could get into names, I don't think we have to. Certainly if council wanted to know that and had a legitimate kind of regulatory reason for knowing it, I believe we could share it under the open records law. But I think the assemblage of numbers and sort of a chart showing things in some digestible way would serve the purpose.
I'm not interested in the names. I'm interested in how this process is going.
Sure.
That's how I measure that. As far as, people are getting like a lot of chances here, and I don't know. I'd just like to see how that's going. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have we sort of finished our directions for staff? Have we sort of covered all the issues that
Did we
cover?
Did we go back over that last one? I'm not sure if we got did we get a full consensus vote on that one? And there were some questions after the fact.
Okay, perhaps not. Ms. Hoppy, were you leading that consensus query?
Yeah, was that the one on the penalties?
Yeah, what I missed was
okay.
First infraction would be a fine. How much?
So $500.
Okay.
So basically, it's all of the suggested best practices that's in the memo, where it starts with first violation, second violation, third violation, fourth. I've added a first violation for a $500 fine and changed first to second, second to third, third to fourth, fourth to fifth.
Got it. And did we get consensus? Was there any more discussion on which infractions we still want to apply that to any of those infractions in that table?
I can make a separate consensus for that.
Okay.
I'd like to ask for consensus to remove warning sign violations as an infraction and cause to be fined or have suspension.
Okay, we have consensus on that one. Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, I forgot what the question I was going to ask. As far as online retailers, do we have a direction forward on how we're going to handle online retailers? Do they have to receive a license, or do they have to have a physical location in the city of Wheat Ridge?
Do we have the authority, Mr. Dahl, to require the licensure of, well, we do with current business license. We license online and out of city businesses.
I guess my suggestion that I think that that's true, but the doubt you're hearing is that that is something I'd like to do some checking on. Number one, if we can. Number two, what the logistics of reaching out to those businesses and requiring that particular license would be. I'm not saying no, don't do it. I just want to understand better, I think, what that would involve. And if that means we have to bring that piece back to you, I hope that's all right.
That'd be great. I don't know if I need to make a consensus for us to go forward with researching that, or if that's just.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Why don't you do that? Do we have consensus to research that issue? We do. Thank you.
And then my next question is regarding the individual retailer, the person at the counter. Are they subject to any violations or penalties relating to this? And if they do take that ticket, how does that impact the retailer? Does the retailer get the same violation, or how do we navigate that relationship?
That was Mr. Kirkpatrick's question, and it's a pertinent one because typically in the liquor arena, of course, if the server serves someone underage, there's a criminal court process for them, and it's not licensure, it's criminal court. But the business, because their server is in front of the liquor authority, and whether or not, frankly, the criminal case results in a conviction, the liquor authority can separately decide that that's a violation and we're going to impose a liquor authority licensing consequence. So here, you have the ability to impose penalties both on the server and on the business, because you can be more stringent than the state statute in this regard. But there's probably a greater reason to look just to the business and have a consequence just for the business with respect to what their employees do, rather than worrying. I mean, now I'm entering a social policy arena, but rather than worrying so much about what the employee doesn't, try to punish the employee, there really is, a pretty good impact is the impact on the business. So in contrast to the liquor arena, I think you can not require necessarily there be any kind of criminal or fine for the person doing the act, but instead of the consequences of the business.
I would tend to agree with that. In the context of this being a new arena for regulation, it seems like we can move forward with regulating the business, and if that doesn't work, then we can move to the individual cashier, if you will, and leave that for further work down the road if this doesn't tend to do that. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hutchinson?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question. If a person is underage and they're selling liquor, serving liquor, or whatever, aren't they to be supervised? How would that be different than if they were in a convenience store and selling a product where people are to be 21 and they sell that and they are there by themselves? Should they not be supervised if they are able to sell that product to people that are 21?
Well, that's clearly the alcohol licensing model, because we, of course, have the ability to sell at 18, but not to consume until 21. So we have that model, and such as you're absolutely correct. There's a supervisory component for alcohol sales. You could import that into this system as well. The question is just how much of the liquor licensing model should be imported. That's a pure policy question. You're not obliged to do it, but you may.
Thank you, Ms. Weaver.
Thank you.
Really, I'm going to go back to what Ms. Hulteen was speaking about earlier. It's very hard to combine liquor and tobacco licensing issues. They have very, very different historical backgrounds, and whereas I very much appreciate wanting to put them together so that it's easier, they just have very different traditions in this state, and I hesitate trying to necessarily make them similar. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Urban.
I'd like to bring forward a consensus regarding cigar shops that are in the business of selling cigars would be excluded from the licensing program.
Cigars as a certain percentage of their business or something. I think there's some specific.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm comfortable setting a percentage here tonight because I really don't know that industry that well, but I would say that cigars and paraphernalia, the cigar box or whatever else they sell there relating to cigars, some way to define that. I would assume it's 50%, but I don't want to get into a percentage because I don't know well enough.
We can pull up. I think there's something in the Mr. Urban in our smoking legislation on having to do with cigar bars. So we could pull that language up and bring that forward and see if that meets your needs.
Ms. Hoppy?
I just have a quick question. Like, do cigar shops in general, do they sell like cigarettes and also vaping products, or is it just cigars and cutters and humidor boxes and stuff like that?
The two in my district that I visited, they specifically told me that they don't want to sell cigarettes or vaping because they don't want that customer base coming in. That they sell, I would say near 100% cigar related items.
I would
pipe tobacco, but that's it.
I would support your consensus if we say something like cigar shops that do not sell packaged cigarettes or liquid nicotine or vaping products.
Yeah.
Ms. Weaver?
I would just also like to clarify as an amendment to Mr. Urban, just to clarify smoke shops as separate from that, like a place that's selling just paraphernalia, not cigars and not tobacco products, but so that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's a shop that only sells cigars.
Thank you.
Mr. Urban, would it be unlawful to sell cigars to someone under the age of 21?
I would assume that's in the state law, and I don't know whether they're exempt from the state legislation or not, but if they are not, then the state will be licensing those entities. So it's not like they're not going to be outside the purview of somebody.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppy?
Oh, I was just putting my hand up for Zach's consensus.
Thank you.
Okay. So a consensus on Mr. Urban's memorandum, and that passes. We have consensus on that. Ms. Hulteen, are you in consensus mode, or are you okay? Do we have any more issues, Mr. Goff and Ms. Schilling, that you think we need to solve with council tonight?
Marianne, anything else on the list?
No, I mean, I guess the only thing would be just to bring forth an ordinance to include the original kind of summary of the regulations that were from the previous council meeting, and to include the amendments that have been made today.
Okay. Any
And
more
what about
discussion?
would you like to bring this back so it coincides with the state? And as Ellen mentioned, we should know more maybe in March, so we could time it. We could wait till March before we bring back a first reading. And so we have a better idea of what the state's doing.
Does that sound timing wise, consensus on that?
I would just add to that relative to the grandfathering in process and whether we write it into the ordinance or the state provides us with some definition as it relates to if someone starts selling tomorrow, are they able to move forward with this, or is there going to be a particular date in March when the ordinance comes forward that if they're in business by that date, then they can continue? So.
Okay.
All right. Ms. Hulteen?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd just like to add on that I'm okay with bringing it back for first reading in late February or March, but would like to stay with that, even if the state seems to be delaying a little bit. I think it's something that's impacting our community right now. And even if we're passing it to go into effect in alignment with the state, I'd rather be moving forward with clarity, in part from Mr. Urban's comments about grandfathering. But I don't want to kicking the can down the road if the state is, at least in terms of getting it passed and being able to start communicating what it is and what the expectations are.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on this item? All right. Well, thank you very much. That'll conclude item number 1. If we have nothing further on that, and we will go to staff reports. Mr. Goff.
I don't think I have anything this evening, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to elected officials reports. Please raise your hand if you have a item for tonight's report. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to say congratulations to All Seasons Holiday Market on the corner of 38th and Teller. I was there on a very chilly Saturday afternoon for the ribbon cutting, and it's full of several local makers. And then it still has the cheese and the eggs and the bread that was across the street when it was Four Seasons Market. And I think that depending on how successful they are will depend on how much more kind of food product they're able to carry in there. But I would just say stop and check them out when you're doing your holiday shopping. Also, I saw that Posy Girl in there this weekend too, so it was great to see her shop reopened. So keep her in mind for your holiday bouquets.
Terrific, thank you very much. Any additional elected officials reports? Ms. Hulteen.
Thank you. I have a question for Patrick. Patrick, have you received any update on the CARES funding that the city might be receiving?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Hulteen. I haven't given an update to council. I think I have to maybe some individuals, but we did ask the county for an additional $250,000 for a potential third round of business grants. They've decided not to distribute any additional funding to the cities beyond what they've already received based on population. There's been new guidance by the U.S. Treasury that the funds can be used for 100% of public safety salaries, and the county, we believe, is going to keep any additional money that they have left from their original allotment and use it for their public safety needs.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then I've got two things to share. Well, I guess one's a question. So it really dawns on me that Jefferson County Public Health, and I think this was underscored tonight, they have a lot of really relevant and good data and information about health concerns in our community. I think they're tracking things that are of great interest. I'd be interested in having Jefferson County Public Health just present to council sometime in the spring some of the big programs and things that they're tracking. I think that they know a lot about our community, and since we don't have our own individuals, so I'd like to request that Jefferson County Public Health just come and present to us some of the things that they're seeing so that we can raise awareness. Would anyone else support me on that? Mr. Stites?
Okay, we will extend an invitation to them to come back and report to us. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I have an ask of everyone. The Wheat Ridge Active Transportation Advisory Team has a program in which they refurbish used bikes and distribute them to people in our community. A lot of them go to Title I students, and other times it's just neighbors in need of a bike that they need for commuting to work or for health. And the house where they're being stored, that person is moving, and we are looking for a place to store it's not me, I'm not really with the ADATs anymore, but the ADATs are looking for a place to store about 25 to 30 bikes. And so if anyone knows of a location that can take in some bikes, it's a great community service and would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional elected officials matters. Mrs. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Rachel. We might talk about the farm as a possible location. I was just curious because I was getting online today to find out about rapid testing, and I actually went to both the city site and the Jefferson County site and had trouble identifying places where I could go to get a COVID test. And I just was curious if I could get the answer, but also if we could clarify that on our city website on places that we could either go, what the cost is, and how fast you can get it. Because I know that there are several day tests and there are immediate tests. And so I don't know if anyone has that answer for me, but I had trouble finding it online today. Thank you.
Yeah, we could definitely add some stuff to our website. The problem is it changes almost daily.
That's what I was wondering, yeah.
And I just got a test myself and did some research, and many of the urgent care facilities in our area do rapid testing.
Okay.
And that they have both drive-through and in person. Kaiser, if you're a Kaiser member, you can get an appointment with Kaiser for a free test, both antibody and it's not a rapid test, I don't believe. But this the state has Allie knows this, I believe, three or four mobile locations.
City Manager, from what I understand from reading Jeffco's bulletin last week, the only community testing site they were actually talking about in Jefferson County was Stride in Lakewood, which is limited to 150 tests a day.
I was on hold for about 15 minutes at Stride today, and so I gave up trying to get information from them.
Yeah, I do think we have a bit of a deficit in that regard in Jefferson County in terms of those community testing sites. But to the city manager's point, this does change all the time. So we'll go research and make sure, the sites that I'm aware of, unfortunately, are in the city and county of Denver. And it's not that anyone can't go there in terms of community testing, which is, I think, what you're describing, perhaps for people that don't have insurance or don't have easy access.
Or even just how much it costs, or if you have insurance. I am not able to go to my doctor because they're in another part of the city, and I was realizing just for some possible places that I might be going that I'd like to get a test. And so I just, I know some you have to have symptoms and some you don't, and really this was just sort of like trying to get a baseline before I was in contact with other people.
Thank you for that feedback. Yeah, we'll work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Additional elected officials matters before we adjourn this evening. I would like to thank the last Saturday I had coffee with the mayor online, and we had a robust discussion, and I appreciate everyone joining us. Ms. Hulteen joined us, and thank you very much. We will meet again with coffee at the mayor on 9 o'clock on December 12th. We have our next council meeting a week from now on the 23rd of November at 7 o'clock at this forum.
Mr. Mayor?
We do not. Actually, we do not. We will be back at study session on Pearl Harbor Day on December 7th.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Urban.
I had a question about the holiday lighting of the celebration. Local Works mentioned it's a virtual event. Do we have any more information about what's that going to look like?
We do. I got an update this morning. Apologize, I didn't write notes down, but it's going to be over 3 weekends. We're going to have they're going to have numerous events, and we'll make sure we get stuff out on the website and on Local Works website. I think they're just finalizing details, but we are going to have a virtual tree lighting ceremony at our same place on the green on 38th Avenue. On one of the Saturdays, there's going to be, I'm sorry, I don't have the exact dates, but we'll get their information out. And then another Saturday, we're going to have Santa Claus at Anderson Park on a fire truck, and we'll be handing out little gift bags. And we talked today about giving out coupons for local businesses. So folks can go buy and shop at local businesses and some other goodies in the bags, safely put together and social distancing. We're also having a lighting, I think both a residential and a commercial Christmas holiday decoration contest. So there's going to be numerous events, and I think there is one other event where you can go and take family photos in front of some kind of holiday scene. So I'm sorry I don't have exact details, but I think they're still finalizing all those, and we'll get those out very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also of note, November 28th is Shop Local Saturday. So if you'll take that opportunity to, as you do every day, find it and buy it in Wheat Ridge. And if there's no more business to come before the council, we will adjourn our meeting with that. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Be safe, drive carefully out there.
And Mr. Mayor, before you
Yes.
adjourn, I'm sorry, looks like all the information is on about the holiday celebrations. It's up on Local Works website. So if you go to Local Works, the first event starts December 5th. So there's all the information online.
Very good. We appreciate it. All right. Happy Thanksgiving. Take care.